I sat there quietly as Darren Eastwood, the newly promoted regional director, slid the termination letter across the mahogany table. His voice was coated in corporate politeness but dripped with condescension. "We need sharper talent who can adapt to the new sales model, Marcus," he said, as if I hadn't been the backbone of the entire Eastern Division for the past 8 years. "My name is Marcus Wynn. I'm 45, and until 10 minutes ago I was the senior logistics strategist for Holland Freight Systems in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was responsible for $19 million in annual accounts, nearly 40% of the company's recurring logistics contracts. And yet here I was, being told I didn't fit the future. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply nodded, folded the paper, and stood up. If this made your blood boil already, type justice in the comments." I gathered the only personal items from my desk: photos of my 2 daughters, the leather-bound planner I never let anyone touch, and a ceramic coffee mug shaped like a semi-truck. I'd always told my wife, Dana, that success wasn't loud. It was consistent. That consistency had just been dismissed by a man who couldn't tell a fuel surcharge from a freight claim. Darren had only been at Holland for 5 months. He came from a venture-backed tech startup in Seattle, hired to modernize our operations, but he never rode with drivers, never met a single client in person. I knew the moment he cut bonuses and introduced KPIs that valued speed over service, my days were numbered. They'd moved my desk closer to the elevator weeks ago, claiming it was for collaboration. My name was left off the latest leadership summit invite. Small signs, easy to ignore if you wanted to believe things were fine, but I'd known ever since Darren assigned Angela Pierce, a 27-year-old client relationship innovator with zero logistics experience, to accompany me to my quarterly pitch with Cormac Steelworks. Cormac was our biggest client. That meeting had gone poorly, and when Cormac's director, Leonard Chase, called me afterward to ask if I was on my way out, I laughed, but deep down I'd felt it coming. As I stepped into the elevator with my box, I passed Tim Granger, the CFO. He didn't even look up from his phone, just muttered, "Tough break, Marcus." I nodded. The halls of corporate loyalty are paved with good intentions and silent betrayals. I walked to the parking lot in a fog of clarity. No anger, no begging, just a knowing, like waking up in a room that had already caught fire, and realizing it wasn't your house to save. The sun was setting behind the Charlotte skyline, casting gold shadows across the hood of my truck. My phone buzzed. It was Leonard from Cormac. "Dinner this Thursday still on?" he texted. He didn't know. Not yet. I didn't respond. I drove home with the radio off, the kind of silence that feels like armor. Dana wasn't home. She'd taken our youngest to visit her sister in Wilmington. The house was quiet, and I liked it that way. I poured myself a scotch, sat in the den, and opened the folder I kept separate from the company servers. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I trusted myself more. It held handwritten notes, old contracts, personal cell numbers, years of relationships, built on miles traveled and hands shaken. They had fired a number, but what they forgot was that behind those numbers were people who didn't know Holland. They knew me, and that was their fatal mistake. The next morning, I didn't wake up with a plan. I woke up with clarity. That's what made it dangerous for them. I didn't rush to make calls, post on LinkedIn, or shoot off bitter emails. No, that's not how this game is played. I made eggs, sat on the back porch, and watched the neighbor's dog chase birds from his yard like he owned the sky. I hadn't taken a day off in months, maybe years, but today I was finally free to think. I pulled out my personal phone, the one Holland didn't touch, and began scrolling through contacts. Dozens of names, people who'd trusted me with their freight, their deadlines, and their business reputation. And I knew something Darren didn't. Every one of those relationships had my fingerprints all over them. The first call I made was to my attorney, Colleen Hartwell. Not a firm, not a billboard lawyer, just Colleen. Sharp as a blade, calm as a monk. She'd helped me draft my last contract when I got promoted, and she owed me a favor. I emailed her the termination notice and our most recent NDA. An hour later she called me back. "They screwed up," she said plainly. "Your non-compete only applies if you resign. You didn't. You're clean." I exhaled slowly. No legal roadblocks, no red tape, just a wide-open runway. I opened the messages again. Leonard, Jackson from Avalon Tires, Simone from Marley Foods. All of them had renewals or negotiations pending within the next 45 days. Holland hadn't just fired a strategist. They'd cut the voice behind over $8 million in accounts. They thought the clients were loyal to the logo, the system, the infrastructure, but they were loyal to me, because I showed up. I answered calls at 2 a.m. when a shipment was stuck in Kansas. I rerouted entire networks to protect perishables in ice storms. These people trusted me, not Darren, not Angela. By lunch, I still hadn't called a single client. I didn't need to, I just uploaded a photo to my private Instagram, just a picture of my back porch, coffee in hand, caption sometimes being pushed out is how you find the edge. Within 20 minutes I had text from 3 clients. You okay? What happened? I didn't say much, just the truth. I'm no longer with Holland, but I'll be fine. That was enough. The calls started before dinner. Not just clients. Old colleagues. A recruiter from a rival firm I'd never responded to suddenly messaged. Heard the news. Can we talk? Darren thought he was getting rid of a liability. But he'd actually unleashed a network he couldn't even begin to understand. The next day, I agreed to meet with 2 people, Leonard from Cormac for dinner, and another, a man named Jules Padron, VP of Strategy at Red Hawk Logistics, a mid-sized competitor that had been aggressively scaling in the Southeast. I knew their model. I respected it, and if they were calling now, it meant the dominoes were already falling. I just needed to decide where I wanted to stand when they hit the floor. As I pulled into the parking lot of the steakhouse to meet Leonard, my phone buzzed again. An unknown number. I let it ring. Then the voicemail popped up. Darren's voice. Tight, anxious. Marcus. Let's talk. I think we might have acted too quickly. There's flexibility. Give me a call. I smiled. They were starting to feel the cracks, and it was only the second day. Leonard didn't waste time on pleasantries. As soon as I sat down, he leaned forward across the table. Brows furrowed. What the hell happened, Marcus? He asked, gripping his glass like he was bracing for bad news. I shrugged. Corporate restructuring. New leadership. New vision. He snorted. New idiocy. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Leonard had worked with me for nearly a decade. We'd navigated storms together, literally and figuratively. His company, Cormac Steelworks, relied on logistics like a body relies on blood, and I had been the artery. He shook his head slowly. They replaced you with that intern-looking girl? I nodded, not unkindly. Angela. She's eager, but green. He didn't laugh. He just said, that's not going to work. He put his fork down, looked me in the eye, and asked the one question I'd been waiting for. Where are you going next? I didn't answer. Not yet. I just said, you'll be the first to know. And I meant it. Leonard understood the power of loyalty, and I respected that, but I wasn't jumping into anything. Not out of pride, but precision. I wasn't just looking for a job. I was looking for leverage. And right now, Holland had handed me the leverage of a lifetime. We finished dinner like 2 old soldiers comparing scars. But as I drove away, I knew that meeting had lit the first fuse. Leonard would not be renewing his contract with Holland. The next morning, I met Jules Padron in a quiet cafe outside downtown. Red Hawk Logistics had always been the younger, scrappier rival to Holland, leaner, faster, more innovative. Jules wore jeans and a blazer, not a suit. He spoke like someone who actually understood operations, not just spreadsheets. Marcus, he said, I've been watching your work for years. What you did with Cormac, with Marley, with Pelican Air, that's not numbers. That's art. I appreciated the compliment, but I cut straight to the chase. What are you offering? Jules didn't flinch. Senior Vice President of Client Strategy, your own team, a seat on our executive board, and the freedom to run your accounts your way, plus equity. He slid a folder across the table. We want your brain, not just your book. It wasn't just a job. It was validation. They didn't want to absorb me, they wanted to build around me. I told Jules I'd give him an answer within 72 hours. He nodded and said something I wouldn't forget. Marcus, if you come over, you don't need to bring anyone with you, but I have a feeling they'll follow. That night I opened my laptop and checked the renewal schedule again. 5 major contracts up for renewal in the next 30 days. If even half of them walked, Holland would feel it like a steel rod to the spine, and they wouldn't be able to explain it, because Darren had never understood the relationships I'd built. At 10:47 p.m. my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail from Darren. His tone had shifted. Less firm, more desperate. Marcus, let's just clear the air. Everett. Mr. Langston, the CEO, wants to connect. We didn't mean to offend. You're valued. Please call me. They were unraveling, and it hadn't even started yet. I deleted the voicemail and opened my calendar. I had meetings to plan, quiet ones. No announcements, just conversations. Conversations that would turn into exits. Exits that would turn into losses. I poured myself a drink and stood in the hallway, looking at the photo of my family. My youngest, Camille, had asked me 2 weeks ago if I'd be home for her science fair. I told her I'd try, but now, I would be there, and I'd be standing not just as a father but as a man no longer beholden to a system that chews through loyalty like paper. The revenge wasn't coming fast. It was coming right. By Wednesday morning the first domino tipped. I didn't push it. Leonard did. Cormac Steelworks submitted formal notice terminating their agreement with Holland Freight Systems, effective immediately. The stated reason: breakdown in continuity and trust with assigned personnel, corporate speak, but sharp as a knife. I hadn't told Leonard to do it. I hadn't asked for loyalty, but trust when earned properly doesn't need reminders. Holland's legal department fired off a generic cease and desist letter to my attorney by noon. Colleen simply laughed and replied with 3 bullet points: termination without cause, non-compete not applicable, no proprietary data breached. It was over before it even started. But that didn't stop Darren from trying to bluff. That afternoon, a message came from Angela, of all people. Hey Marcus, Darren wants to know if you'd be open to consulting temporarily, just until things stabilize. They thought they could use me as a crutch, until they figured out how to bandage the gaping wound they created. I didn't respond, not to Angela, not to Darren, not to anyone from that side of the glass wall, because my silence was saying what words never could. You had your chance. You burned. By Friday 2 more clients had reached out, Simone from Marley Foods and Jackson from Avalon Tires. Their language was similar. I just need to know, are you really gone? Yes, I said. Are you going to be at Red Hawk? Not yet. Would you take us with you if you go? I paused, then told them the truth. I won't recruit you, but I won't stop you either. By nightfall, Marley Foods had sent over a formal request for termination from Holland's contract. That was nearly $900,000 in annual logistics revenue gone, and they still had no idea who would be next. On Monday morning I agreed to a private meeting with Everett Langston, the CEO of Holland. Not at the office. Neutral ground. A quiet lounge in a hotel off Tranian Street. He looked older than I remembered, like the stress had aged him 10 years in 1 week. Marcus, he started. We made a mistake. I nodded, sipping my black coffee, saying nothing. We trusted a vision and forgot about the relationships that got us here. I watched him dance around an apology, trying to preserve his dignity while salvaging what was left of the company. We want to bring you back. Not in the same role. A revised title. Executive liaison. Higher salary. Consulting equity. It would have been flattering if it wasn't so predictable. I leaned forward and looked him in the eye. Everett, you didn't lose me last week. You lost me 3 months ago when you stopped asking what the clients needed and started asking how to cut costs. He blinked. I continued. You let someone who didn't know the business gut the spine of your company. And now the body is twitching and you're hoping I can resuscitate it. He sighed. Defeated. So that's it? I nodded. That's it. As I walked out of the lounge, I felt lighter. The kind of lightness that comes when you stop pretending broken things can be fixed. The kind of calm that only comes before the storm finishes what it started. And this storm was just getting warmed up. 2 days after that meeting with Everett, the real reason for my firing came to light, and it wasn't incompetence. It wasn't even Darren's ego. It was something colder, sharper. A friend from inside Holland, Marisol Tran from compliance, called me from a private number. We hadn't spoken in months. You didn't hear this from me, she said, but you need to know they're selling the company. My stomach clenched, even though I'd half expected something like this. The acquisition contract was drafted weeks ago, she continued, but there's a clause. They want clean client portfolios. No key man risk. They needed your accounts detached from you. So that's why I was pushed out. Not because I underperformed, but because I overperformed. My name was too deeply tied to the revenue. My trust, my relationships, my handshakes. They couldn't be sold as easily as balance sheets. I wasn't a number on a report. I was a liability to the sale. I was too essential. They needed to make me vanish without alerting the clients. That's why Angela was inserted quietly. That's why my assistant was reassigned. That's why Darren's arrival wasn't just corporate restructuring. It was a surgical strike. I sat alone in my study, lights off, thinking about how carefully it had all been orchestrated. Not a random betrayal, a strategic removal. They tried to replace a living bridge with concrete and hoped no one would notice. But the weight was already too much. Cormac had left. Marley had exited. Avalon was on the fence. The cracks weren't just forming, they were breaking open, and now I knew the real stakes. It wasn't just about my job, it was about killing my legacy so someone else could sell it for parts. That night I called Jules at Red Hawk. "I'm in," I said. "But I'm not bringing clients with me. I don't have to." He understood. In this industry, loyalty follows value, and I didn't need to persuade anyone. They'd come because their trust had already been broken by Holland. The next morning, Red Hawk issued a private internal memo. "Welcome Marcus Wynn, Senior VP of Client Strategy. Effective immediately. No public announcement. No fireworks. Just the quiet opening of a new door." That same morning, 3 more clients terminated their contracts with Holland. One by one, like dominoes with names. Simone, Jackson, Leonard. They didn't cite me directly, but every notice mentioned the same thing: uncertainty with current relationship structure. Holland scrambled. Darren sent emails. Everett called again. Even Angela tried to reach out. I responded to none. The damage was already done, not because I'd stolen anything, but because they'd underestimated what they were actually losing. Then, the final twist came from Marisol. She forwarded me a confidential document, a memo from Veridan Capital, the private equity firm trying to buy Holland, concerns about declining revenue linked to sudden account terminations. The offer was being revised. The valuation slashed. The acquisition, once a sure thing, was now on ice. I sat there in the dim morning light, coffee in hand, as that final puzzle piece clicked into place. They didn't just fire me. They set fire to their own deal. And now they were watching it burn. Within 10 days of my exit, Holland Freight Systems was in full retreat. 8 major clients had walked. 3 more were considering their options. What had once been a stable, predictable revenue stream had turned into a leaking ship, and everyone was scrambling for lifeboats. Word spread fast in our industry. Charlotte's freight world isn't as big as it looks. Every carrier, broker, and warehouse manager was whispering the same thing. Holland's bleeding. Wynn's on the move. And still I said nothing. I gave no interviews, no press release. My silence had become its own kind of pressure. Inside Red Hawk, I was rebuilding, not from scratch but from memory. Every account I'd once carried had a name, a story, a rhythm. I wasn't cold calling. I was reconnecting. Jules gave me 2 analysts, full marketing support, and something I never had at Holland: a stake. Real ownership. Every deal I brought in wasn't just revenue, it was equity. It was mine, not rented, not borrowed. And that difference? It changed everything. I wasn't working for a company anymore. I was building with. On a Thursday afternoon, I received a package at my new office. No return label. Inside, a note in Everett Langston's handwriting. It read, "You were right. We tried to make you invisible so we could sell what you built. Instead, we watched it collapse. If there's ever a time you're willing to talk, I owe you that conversation." I folded the note and placed it in my drawer. Not out of bitterness, but because I wasn't done yet. There were still a few more pieces to set in place. A few more truths to uncover. Later that day, I received a call from an old friend, Adrian Knox, now CFO at Larkenhaven Freight Consultancy. He was laughing as soon as I picked up. "Marcus," he said, "I just came out of a meeting with Veridan Capital. They're asking about you." I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Adrian chuckled. "Because they're trying to figure out how you dismantled half of Holland's valuation without laying a finger on a single contract. One of their VPs called it the most elegant corporate sabotage he's ever seen." I didn't smile, not because I wasn't satisfied, but because that word sabotage didn't quite sit right. I didn't break anything. I didn't steal. I didn't threaten. I just walked away and let the truth do the talking. Loyalty isn't something you can carve out of spreadsheets. It's earned. It's maintained. It's human. That was the part Holland never understood. Darren treated clients like numbers. Everett treated relationships like assets. And when they tried to extract me from the very thing I built, they discovered what every good architect knows: remove the foundation and the structure falls. That night, Dana and I sat on the porch, a warm Carolina breeze washing over the yard. "You seem still," she said, handing me a glass of wine. I nodded. "It's not revenge," I whispered. "It's clarity." They played their hand. I played mine. And now I'm just watching the river carry the rest away. 2 weeks into my new role at Red Hawk, I was invited to speak at the Southeastern Freight Leadership Conference. The invite was last minute. One of the panelists had dropped out, but Jules urged me to accept. "You've earned your place at the table," he said. And the topic was client trust in a changing market. Fitting. The panel featured industry leaders, executives, and, ironically, Everett Langston himself. When I saw his name on the roster, I almost declined. But something in me said no, not this time. Not when the full circle was about to close. I took the stage in a crisp black suit. No flashy slides. No rehearsed punchlines. Just a binder of client data and a calm voice. I spoke about trust, not as a buzzword but as currency. Clients don't stay because of rates, I said. They stay because someone answers the phone at 10 p.m. They stay because someone remembers their daughter's name, or the storm that shut down their factory 2 winters ago. They stay because service becomes personal. The room was quiet, listening, not blinking. Then I added, and when companies forget that, the market reminds them. After the panel, Everett approached me alone. His posture was different. No longer the CEO who once looked past me in the elevator. "Marcus," he said, offering a genuine hand, "I want to thank you for today. You made your point without bloodshed." I nodded and shook his hand, but then I asked the question I'd held back for weeks. "When did you decide I had to go?" His eyes dropped to the floor. "When Veridan demanded detachment from keyman dependencies. They said no one person should hold that much sway over revenue. Darren's job was to untie you quietly. We didn't expect so many would follow. So, there it was. Not malice. Not betrayal born of hate. Just corporate logic taken too far. But understanding doesn't erase damage, and apology doesn't restore trust. You know," I said softly, "I would have helped transition. I would have trained the next person. If you just told me the truth." Everett looked like he'd been slapped. "I know," he whispered. "I was afraid you'd take everything with you." I looked around the hotel lobby, then back at him. "You should have been more afraid that I wouldn't have to." That night I went home and opened a letter from Simone at Marley Foods. Inside was a thank you card with a handwritten note. "Our entire supply chain runs smoother now. I didn't know how bad things were until they got better. You made that happen." That card stayed on my desk for weeks, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Not all victories make noise. Some just feel like peace. 6 months to the day after Darren fired me across that conference room table, Red Hawk Logistics announced its quarterly earnings. Revenue was up 34%. New client acquisition was at a record high, and 72% of that new business, it came directly from accounts I'd once managed at Holland. Not stolen, not coerced, simply earned again by doing the same thing I always did, showing up, leading with reliability, and never forgetting that relationships are human, not contractual. Jules called me into the boardroom that morning with the executive team. They toasted with champagne, but I stayed silent, just watching the sunlight catch the numbers on the projection screen. The weight of it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like closure. After the meeting, Jules pulled me aside. "You've rebuilt faster than we imagined. We're offering you full equity partnership. It's official." I shook his hand and thanked him, and he said something I'll never forget. "They tried to remove you from your work. You turned your work into ownership." That afternoon, I signed the documents and became a full partner. No middleman. No fragile title. Built in. What I had always tried to create for others, I had finally created for myself. Later that evening, as I packed for a weekend trip with my family, one I didn't have to cancel for a client emergency, I got a text from a number I barely remembered. It was Angela. The message was short. "I've been let go. Everyone's gone. Darren resigned. Any chance you're hiring?" I stared at it for a long time. No anger. No smirk. Just a pause. Then I forwarded the message to HR with a note. "Consider interviewing her. She wasn't the architect of what happened. Just a piece on their board. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore." That part was done. 1 week later, Everett finally followed through on his promise. We met for coffee. No lawyers. No defenses. Just 2 men sitting at a table finally facing the truth. "We dismantled you," he said, thinking the clients would stay with the walls. "We never realized you were the foundation." I didn't offer forgiveness. That wasn't mine to give. But I offered something else, understanding. Because now I knew what they tried to cut out of the company wasn't a role. It was relationship capital. And that doesn't belong to a company. It belongs to the person who built it. That evening I walked into my home and placed the final frame on my office wall. A quote from Dana I'd printed myself. "Build something no one can take from you." And that's exactly what I'd done. Because the best revenge isn't a takedown. It's building something better, and never looking back.